Okay, it should be going now. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for another T1D egg. Today we've got Professor Kathleen Gillespie from Bristol, who's going to be talking about the T1DRA study, or type 1 diabetes risk in adults, which I actually managed to get out this time. So for those of you who don't know Kathleen, she's the head of group of diabetes and metabolism in Bristol, and she's the chief investigator for the BOX or Barts Oxford family study of type 1 diabetes, and for today, most applicable, she's the chief investigator for the T1DRA study, which she's going to be talking to us about. But it's also a nice opportunity for me to say thanks to Kathleen for 15 years plus of mentoring through my PhD and various fellowships, and I know that she's very appreciated by everybody in Bristol. So thank you, Kathleen.
Gosh, thank you very much. And yeah, it's a pleasure to chat to you. And I'm looking at how many people are, about 20 on the call, and so I'd sort of like this to be a conversation, a bit like Anna's just said. In our group, we, I guess, discuss these sorts of things all the time. So I think this is sort of a welcome to everyone to the Bristol group, and stop me at any point. I'm, particularly if I'm not being clear, I always say to my students, stop me at any time, because if I'm not being clear, we can just discuss whatever point it is. But this is an update on the T1DRA study, as Anna said. I'm going to have a go at sharing my slides. So have you got full screen, Anna?
Yes, I have.
Perfect. Okay, so see which. So the background is our group and many other groups have worked on childhood type 1 diabetes and looking at markers of risk over many years. And particularly there are several birth cohorts that have really added to our knowledge of risk. And I think everybody now accepts that if you've got multiple islet autoantibodies, so 2 or more islet autoantibodies by the age of about 5 years old, that you're almost but not quite destined to get type 1 diabetes. So the risk is said to be 83% by the age of 20. But risk in adults is understudied. And these are just some graphs of incidence data. The first are some American data, which are plotted by males and females and show very nicely, I think, that peak in incidence of type 1 diabetes that we see in early adolescence, which then decreases. But actually, the bit that over many years people haven't really talked about is this group here in sort of from the early 20s to over 60, where actually there's a very sizable incidence ongoing in type 1 diabetes. And this was supported by Nick's work from the Exeter group, Nick Thomas's work, looking at genetic risk in UK Biobank and showing again that actually in red here, you have a consistent incidence of type 1 diabetes across the age spectrum. So, while it might have been expected that there would be more in childhood, it's actually reasonably steady. And where we came into this is work that Anna and I and others, and we've collaborated closely in particular with the Cardiff group and Susan's team on this, is looking at slow progressors to type 1 diabetes, who we define them as individuals who are positive for multiple islet autoantibodies for 10 years but haven't developed symptoms of diabetes. And when this grant went originally to the, as used to be the JDRF, now breakthrough T1D, they referred to these individuals as elite regulators. So individuals who actually are at risk, but in some way have got some level of self-protection. And when Anna and I were thinking about this, we put together a review that was invited by Sarah and Alberto Puglisi about slow progressors. And having looked at NICS data and other data on adult onset, we thought that there was a conundrum because we'd been following up slow progressors, but actually the frequency of slow progressors in a study like BOX, the Bart's Oxford study, which has been running for, it'll be 40 years next year, the frequency is quite low. So they cannot account for all of the individuals who are diagnosed in adulthood. So that led us to suggest that there's a gap in our understanding of the pathogenesis of type 1 diabetes and the need for a longitudinal study to follow up at-risk adults. And that's really where T1DRA has come from. So the T1DRA study aims to determine the frequency of islet autoimmunity in UK adults by screening 40,000 members of the adult general population. And our plan was to screen 20,000 existing samples, so samples from existing studies, and also samples, also to recruit 20,000 individuals so that we could screen for islet autoimmunity and then follow up. Because actually, if we want to understand the natural history, we need to be able to follow people up. And then we plan to invite the positive individuals to long-term monitoring, both single and multiple islet autoantibody positive. We also wanted to compare the general population with relatives, because we've got, obviously we followed up relatives in the Bart's Oxford study for a long time, and we also had access to individuals in UK trial NUT that we wanted to monitor in parallel. There is another aim to the study, a more mechanistic aim, but for today I'm just going to focus on these two aims. So what were our key research questions? What's the frequency of autoimmunity? What's the risk of future diabetes associated with autoantibody positivity in adulthood? And how does that compare with genetically at risk, say, family members? Are islet autoantibody combinations different in adults? IAA, which we know is important in early childhood, but we know the frequency decreases with increasing age over childhood. Is it going to be important in adults or not? I.e., should we be screening for it or not? And what are the genetic determinants of islet autoantibody positivity in adults? So that gives you a sort of an idea of our overall aims. First of all, I'm going to mention the existing samples, and that they come from two sources. The first is in collaboration with the Exeter team, looking at the Extend study, which is also called the Exeter 10,000. Now, when by the time this was funded, Richard and Nick and the team in Exeter already had resources to do a GRS screen on this cohort. So they, with the knowledge of the GRS, had set up a study to take a high genetic risk population and a low, or I call them not high genetic risk, so, or if you want low genetic risk, there's about 1,125 in each group. And they had screened them in Exeter using the RSR ELISA, which Tim MacDonald uses in the routine lab. So they had already tested with the RSR ELISA. We tested in Bristol for IAA using the RBA. And then as part of this T1DRA grant funded by the Helmsley, we had also said that we were going to test using a LIPS triplex method. So we decided that actually this is a nice way of comparing the two methods, so that we would have a subset of individuals typed or analysed using both the LIPS method and the RSR method. And then the remainder of the Exeter 10,000 population would just be screened by the LIPS method in Bristol. Now, where we are at the moment is on this, we have the 2,250 are finished using both methods, and Nick has worked up the analysis on that. We've also tested, I can't remember, a couple of thousand of the remainder of individuals. And Georgina from our team has been working with Anita and the team in Exeter. So the team in Exeter find the samples in the freezers there. And then Georgina and Jack from our team have been going down and aliquoting the samples, bringing them back to Bristol. So that's all ongoing. There are a lot of data, but I'm not going to present it today, partly because we need to spend more time analysing it ourselves. And then the other part of the existing samples are the children of the 90s. Now, previously, Anna has taken the children of the 90s population, so those children who were recruited in the early 1990s, and they're now age 30. Anna's got the samples for age 24, and she's already analysed the frequency in those children. So what we're doing in this study is actually taking samples from the parents that have been taken at various time points over the last 20 years. And at the moment, we're identifying the available samples to be tested. So that's what's ongoing with the existing samples. But mostly today, I'm going to focus on the second approach, which is recruiting 20,000 new UK adults. And this is the schematic that went into the grant. And effectively, we were going to recruit through social media and then have an online website with the patient information and consent, or participant information and consent, screen for autoantibodies, and through capillary blood collection, and then test samples for the LIPS assays that I just mentioned. So how are we with recruitment? So the study was launched on World Diabetes Day 2023, and so it's just been running for over a year. And as of last Thursday, which was World Diabetes Day 2024, 7,597 people had been recruited to the study. And this cake was made by Zara in our team to mark the first year of the T1DRA study. So thank you for that, Zara. And kits, almost 7,500 kits had been sent out as of last week, and that's probably gone up slightly. You can see the pattern of recruitment across the UK. It sort of goes with the population. So in areas of most dense population, I think we're seeing obviously most people recruiting to the study across the Central Belt in Scotland, South Wales, the sort of areas of the north with large cities, and maybe some less across rural communities. So what have we got in these 7.5, so almost, well, over 7,500 people? 47% of them have a relative with type 1 diabetes. And I guess that means it's not a general population study. It's a half general population study, and it's a half family members study. But we didn't exclude relatives from joining, and that was a decision that we made in the first place because we felt that we could deal with that information if lots of relatives did join the study. As long as we were aware of who they were, we would be able to take that into account in the analysis. So 2/3 have a first degree relative and 1/3 a more distant relative. And you can see the breakdown there for the first degree relatives. So over 1,200 have a child with type 1 diabetes, so the frequencies of mothers, fathers, siblings, and we have 5 non-identical twins. Now, over the course of the year, the frequency of relatives is decreasing. So when the study was launched a year ago, and we were helped by Diabetes UK a lot in the launch of the study. So I guess it's not surprising that a lot of people with type 1 diabetes signed up. in the first 12 hours, 1,000 people signed up to the study, and many of them had a first-degree relative. And so I think there was a population out there who have a relative with type 1 diabetes who were looking for a screening study. And they signed up to this study. That's just a picture of our website for anyone who wants to go and have a look. But all of the information for participants is through this website. What do our population of recruits look like? And I guess not unexpectedly for online recruitment, 94% are white. So this is not representative of the UK population, although again, the diversity is improving over time, and that's something that we are working on. I guess from this study, what you would say is that if you want to recruit white females, online recruitment is absolutely fantastic, because we've got more than 75% are female. So we lack males in this study and lack ethnic diversity. But nevertheless, the aim of the study was to look at what's happening in adults, and at the moment we've got what we've got. So I'll tell you about that. The age distribution is, I think, focused on the fact that we've got lots of parents. So you can see there's quite a few parents in that sort of mid-20s to mid-40s group. But actually we've got recruitment in the younger age group, and also individuals right up to the age of 70. And we weren't really sure how many older people would sign up, but certainly some have. And we've had requests from people over 70 as to why they're not allowed to sign up. And actually we did it to have a smoother route through ethics, because we thought that the ethics team mightn't like us asking lots of older people to provide samples at home. But actually maybe that's something we need to think about in the future. We also didn't exclude people with a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes or any other form of diabetes. So we've got 257 with a diagnosis of type 2, 163 with gestational, and 26 with other, which, looking at the notes, looks like it's diet-treated pre-diabetes. Almost all of the ones who ticked other ticked diet-treated. Several have had trouble controlling their blood glucose and have sent us some notes on that. And we have identified people with islet autoantibodies in these groups. And I think they have fed it back. Well, I know it, they've fed it back to their clinical teams. We've provided a letter. And certainly one lady emailed us afterwards who had said she joined the study because she wanted to understand more about her diabetes, and she was positive for multiple islet autoantibodies. We sent that back to a letter to her for her to give to her GP, and she sent us a message saying once she went on insulin, she said she felt so much better that if you've got any more research, bring it on. So we found that quite positive, and there have been more messages like that. But actually, again, that as a side, wasn't really the aim of our project. So the geographical spread across the UK is fairly good. We've got fewer family members signing up over time and more members of the general population. And although diversity is increasing, our participants are still predominantly white females. So how do we collect the samples? It's a little kit for a capillary blood collection. So this is the box that gets sent out to participants. And here you have Claire and Shanice from the team. Before Christmas last year, there were lots. We were like Santa Claus in the group. There were lots of these sacks being sent out for sample collection. And looking at the results coming back, at the moment there's a 65% return rate, which is actually not bad for sort of remote sample collection. We've had about 70% return rate over the years in the box study. So at the moment we feel happy with 65%. We sent one reminder initially, and we made the decision to send a second reminder more recently. So hopefully it will go up beyond 65%. Now, in terms of serum volume, having enough actual blood to test for 4 different islet autoantibodies, we used 15 microliters as our cutoff, saying that if we had less than 15 microliters of serum, we would need to repeat samples, and 15 microliters of serum reflects 30 microliters of blood. And that has ended up being about 6% of the total. The remainder had serum volumes ranging from 16 to 450 microliters. I mean, 450 microliters from a finger prick is really quite impressive. And on this graph, you can see the results of about 5,000 samples. And you'll see a plateau here around 100 microliters. And that's because the capillary tube has got a red line around it at 200 microliters. So a lot of people are getting to 200 microliters, sending the sample back. A lot of people are sending back less, but that's okay. We can cope with that. And a lot are sending back more. I mean, really impressive quantities of blood. So very pleased with the samples we've been receiving. The islet autoantibody screening method, as I said, is a luciferase method that Anna and Olivia in our team worked up a few years ago. It only requires 2 microliters of serum to test for truncated GADA, which is a more specific GADA test, IA2A antibodies and antibodies to zinc transporter 8. We then use a radio binding assay for IAA. We screen the positives initially, and then in those that come positive, we ask for a separate capillary sample and not a separate venipuncture sample, because we haven't got a system for, unless people go to their GP to have a sample taken, which might not be popular with the GPs. The most straightforward method is to get another capillary sample. And actually, over the years, our results in capillary samples and our confirmation rate have been very consistent. So we're reasonably happy that is working well. Any comparisons that we've done with venipuncture in previous times have been good, but we do know that capillary samples are more prone to having hemolysis, and that can affect some assays. It's said to affect the IAA assay, but we have not seen much evidence of that. And to date, we've identified 177 confirmed positive, so positive in 2 individual samples. Now, of those, 37 are multiple, but 140 are single. So we're identifying really quite high frequencies of single islet autoantibody positive individuals. And I'm really happy in this call to have a conversation about that, because we had the Immunology of Diabetes meeting 2 weeks ago, and also there was a Colorado screening meeting on Thursday and Friday last week. And you know, I do think it's really important to think about what single islet autoantibody positivity means. Now, ours is not the general population; it's a mixture of relatives and general population. But I think in this study, it's now a good time for us to actually reflect on what we've got and think about how we want to move forward. So just breaking up the single antibody positives, what you can see here is that more than 50% are single GADA positive. One of our questions was whether we would see IAA positives. And in fact, not only did we see them, but initially it became clear that we were seeing a lot, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about thresholds, but we were seeing quite a few IAAs close to the positivity threshold. So we increased our positivity threshold from the 97.5th percentile of the control population to the 99th percentile. And this here reflects the 99th percentile. So these people have, you know, reasonable levels of IAA. So that question about whether we would see IAA in adults, this suggests that we do. Will those individuals go on to develop type 1 diabetes? I guess that's one of the questions that we're trying to answer. We saw about an equal frequency of single autoantibodies to zinc transporter 8 and a smaller proportion of singles to IA2. And when you look at the proportion of multiples, we see almost every combination, with GADA and IA2, which I guess we would consider to be quite a high-risk combination, being the most common. But we see every combination, except so far we haven't seen IAA and IA2 together. So what ages are these individuals positive at? And the answer is it reflects the population that we've screened, really. So we're not seeing all the positives in the very young group. So you can see there's about 17 or 18 individuals between the ages of 19 and 27. But given that our highest numbers were in the sort of 30s and 40s, that's also, so it's basically proportionate to the population that we've screened, which to me means that actually a bit like those incidence data we were looking at the beginning, we are seeing antibody positivity across the age spectrum. So what happens next for participants? The negatives are informed by text message, and people seem to have been okay with that. Individuals who are single are informed by email with the offer of a phone call. And the individuals with multiple islet autoantibody positives are informed by phone call. And then they're provided reports if they want to have a report. We offer annual follow-up, and so far all have agreed to annual follow-up. And we're following up for islet autoantibodies, pancreatic enzymes, so just looking at pancreatic markers over time. For UC-PCR, effectively a measure of C-peptide, and HbA1c. Now we're also taking DNA samples, but we take one DNA sample in the initial follow-up, and then we don't obviously continue to take DNA samples. So far, we've had one participant diagnosed 2 weeks after his initial screen result, which, if I'm remembering properly, was a single GADA positive. We told him what the symptoms were of type 1 diabetes, and I think he thought, well, actually, I think I've got those symptoms, and so he was diagnosed very quickly. And so far, we're in very early days of the follow-up. So of 21 people where we have HbA1c results so far, 2 have pre-diabetes, so are in stage 3 if you wish, aged 36 and 56, and 2 have been diagnosed aged 23 and 34. And we've also set up a system for annual follow-up of at-risk individuals from at the moment, the T1DRA individuals are still being followed up within T1DRA, but we've set up a system for individuals who are autoantibody positive relatives. But ultimately, we will probably have a system where all follow-up happens within this study. So we rolled it out within the last month. It was individuals in UK TrialNet. Now, UK TrialNet stopped recruiting in the UK in 2020. Because the funding ended, and those individuals have not been followed up since. So those individuals were made aware of it, and some individuals in the ELSA study. So far, 69 have consented, and 5 of those are from ELSA, and 45 have returned samples. So again, it's very early days of follow-up for these people who already know they're at risk. So coming back to positivity threshold, so we've identified, traditionally Bristol used the 97.5th percentile of a school child population. And I guess one of the questions we've been thinking about is that appropriate for adults? Very quickly for IAA, we made the decision that it wasn't because of the number of samples that were coming in close to the threshold. Then we thought about GADA, and this is work done by Sean Grace and members of the Alistair Williams Antibody Facility. We have samples on 500 adult blood donor controls, and so Sean and the lab tested for all the GADA tests, the truncated GADA test, the full-length GADA test, for both LIPS and radiobinding assays. And actually, it looked like the the thresholds that we have been using that were set on childhood cohorts also worked well in the adult cohort. So initially, it didn't look like we needed to change the threshold, and the same was the case for IAA that was tested by Olivia, Anna, and the AWAF team. But in real life, actually, we increased the threshold for IAA. So what about truncated GADA? So I'm just going to show you the results, and I'm very happy for anyone to get involved. Stop me at any point in the conversation. This is what the GADA levels, truncated GADA is a more specific test. And these are the levels above the 99.5th threshold. So you can see the initial levels here. Some of them are quite low, but if we were to change to the 99th percentile, we would only lose 5 people. So we've still got quite a lot of people with low levels, relatively low levels of truncated GADA. But this is a natural history study. So should we wait and say, let's see what happens with these individuals? Will their levels increase? Will they develop more antibodies? Or are we, as was suggested to me at the IDS, are we, telling people they're at risk and giving them that additional worry when in fact they may never develop type 1 diabetes? And obviously that's a big concern for us, because we don't want to worry people who are not at risk. So it's something we've been thinking a lot about. We had been thinking about it before, and it came up as well in the Colorado screening meeting about what thresholds are appropriate. Annetta Ziegler, who obviously leads the world in childhood screening, was saying that for single autoantibody positives in the general population, she uses a 3-fold increased threshold, and in fact in her GPAD studies she only follows up 0.1% of the single antibody positives, but that's a screening study and not a natural history study. And Annetta has sent me how they've calculated their 3-fold increased threshold, so that we can look at that as a potential. In addition to this, because we were worried about this, I asked Sean to look at our existing data in box and work out which islet autoantibody GADA positive individuals, which ones actually developed type 1 diabetes, and supported by Anna to do the analysis. Effectively, this is a bit schematic, but Sean's data showed that it was the individuals with single antibodies but high levels of GADA who really had quite high risk of developing type 1 diabetes. But we don't know what that looks like in the general population. So we think that these individuals are probably the most at risk, but as I said, I'd love some conversation around what we do about those with lower levels. And one thing Jessica Dunn actually asked, Parth presented the T1DRA data at the Colorado meeting, and Jessica Dunn, who used to be with JDRF, asked whether we'd done genetic screening on the single positives, and maybe that's something that we need to look at as well, which we haven't done yet. But then going back to what real life looks like in terms of diagnosis of diabetes in adults, and these are data from the ADDRESS-2 study published in 2018. The assays were radio-binding assays run here in Bristol. And I guess if we focus on GADA in the red, what you see in young children is the GADA frequency increases in adolescence and then stabilizes over time, so that actually it is the most common antibody, particularly in people diagnosed in later decades, and you've got fewer multiple antibody positives in that older population. So actually what we're seeing in T1DRA does reflect what's seen at diagnosis in the general population. So what else are we doing besides the screening? A few collaborations are starting to come out of this study. One is with James Pearson at Cardiff University. And James is very interested in diurnal rhythms in antibody responses and indeed in other responses. So for about the last, I think, 2,000 to 3,000 participants, we've had ethics to ask for the time of day that the sample is taken. And I recently sent James the data from, I think, about 1,800 people, where he has the results on the time of day that the sample was taken and the antibody response. Now, a lot of these people will be negative, but that's with James at the moment. For DNA, and obviously I've said, I think we've got some questions that we now need to look at genetics to help us answer, particularly in terms of the single antibody positives. As we've received the capillary blood samples, we store the blood clot, and one of Jack in our team is now looking, with Georgina's support, at whether we can make blood spots from those blood clots that are of good enough quality for developing a genetic risk score. If not, it's in our protocol to go back to the antibody positives and collect mouth brush samples, which we have been doing, and so we've got those samples as well in the bank. And I met Lorik at the IDS, and Lorik is interested in looking at genetic differences in relatives versus the general population. T1DRA is also feeding into some ongoing projects, including recent funding where we're looking at exocrine markers as to help us predict progression rate in those who will go on to develop type 1 diabetes, and also in analysis of the L-selectin pathway in collaboration with the Cardiff and Exeter teams. And we're happy if others have ideas that they think T1DRA can help with, just let us know. So in summary, islet autoantibody screening in adults using online consent and remote capillary sample collection, it's feasible. I think it's really cost effective, but does not represent the diversity of the UK population. The adult population harbours single and multiple islet autoantibody positive individuals. GADA is the most prevalent. IAA is unexpectedly common, even when we've gone to our higher threshold. Positive individuals are made aware of clinical symptoms of type 1 diabetes and followed up annually for islet autoantibodies, UC-PCR, HbA1c, and offered mechanistic studies and clinical trials as they become available. We think now is very much the time that we want to engage more with the participants in this study and to arrange some PPIE meetings to discuss actually what they want from us in terms of support and research directions. Our input previously, before these people were identified, were from at-risk relatives, but now I think we need more PPI meetings with at-risk members of the general population. And positive participants will also be made aware of the UK and European registries. And I think, first, last but by no means least, all the people who have contributed to this study, and this has been a fairly busy area over the last year. So on the left-hand side are co-investigators and who have also come on board as the management team for the study. Nick, Richard and Anita for all the help with the extend analysis. Then within our team, Isabel, anybody who knows the box study knows Isabel. Isabel coordinated the box study for over 20 years. And although she recently retired, actually she really helped us set up the ethics for this study. The double star here, should be a star, goes for Rachel, who actually I think everybody in our team knows has made this study happen. She's coordinated every single aspect of it and brings it all together and makes it all happen. So Georgina has, as I said, gone to Exeter to help with the extend samples. Alana here is half lab and half coordination with Rachel. So Alana's amazing. One day she's in the lab testing samples and the next she's emailing the participants and really working between both sides of the study. Then in blue we have all our antibody leads. So Olivia and Anna actually set up the assay that we're using, the multiplex screening assay. Claire and Sean as well are antibody leads. And then Zara, who made that amazing cake that you saw at the beginning, has processed a very large number of the T1DRA samples. And Sarah is a mainstay in the lab, making everything happen in the lab, supported by Ben and by Jack, who's not in the photo. So we need an updated photo of our team. Stu is our database coordinator and helped us set everything up on REDCap, which we'd never done before T1DRA. And thanks to Parth, who's also supported, because we've had, I think, really good interaction with the ELSA study. And a lot of participants in T1DRA are actually parents in ELSA. And there has been a nice collaboration between the studies. And I think that's it from me. And I'm really happy to take any questions or indeed just comments or discussion. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was really clear. And obviously, I think it was really interesting. Yes, so if anybody's got any questions, then please feel free to raise your hand, or if nobody's speaking, just launch right in. And also, if you're a slightly younger member of the audience and would be happier, then just use the chat function. Mark or I can read out questions. So do feel like you can ask questions.
Can I crack off?
Yeah,
Anna, is that right?
Go for it.
Kathleen, it's so lovely to see all that data and all that hard work coming to fruition. It's absolutely fantastic. I had a couple of questions, one quantitative, one qualitative, actually. So the numbers one is, I wasn't quite sure of what the denominator, the actual proportion of all the T1DRA patients that you've actually tested that 170 came from. But that's looking to me at around 2.5%, something in that ballpark positive, which if you're taking...
It's a bit higher than that, Nick, and I guess I was a bit deliberate in not giving it, but we're slightly more than 0.5% for the multiples, and we're in the 3% range overall.
I guess my question is, given that half of your cohort have a family history of type 1, a lot of which is first degree, and therefore will have increased genetic risk, and you're using population 97.5th, is that a bit lower than perhaps we might have anticipated if you'd just done the maths on 2.5% being the general population being positive? And particularly around the truncated GAD, that if you're moving from 97.5th to 99th and you're only losing 5 of whatever it is, 100 odd people, what's that telling us about that truncated GAD specificity that you're using, that you're losing such a few people between 97th and 99th, and really just kind of comments around those percentages. And then the qualitative question was the percentage of that, you know, when you're going back for a repeat sample, how many people are giving you one? Are you getting people dropping out at that stage? And feedback from GPs really who've had particularly the multi-antibody positive people. Have you had any feedback from GPs about what should I be doing with this?
Okay, so I'll answer the last one first. I go to Rachel because she'd know better than me, but we've had no feedback from GPs, and actually all communication has been through the participants, because that's what our ethics is set up for. We've had some of our participants come back to us, you know, with questions, and basically saying that they feel that their GP just doesn't know enough about type 1 diabetes to be able to advise them. I think that's what we get most commonly as the comment, but we've had no GP, to the best of my knowledge, come directly to us to query any of the results. We do know that some of the people who, particularly the type 2s with islet autoantibodies, who when they went to their GP, they did have their diagnosis changed. In a couple of cases, there was independent testing through the NHS in order for that to happen. But Rachel, are you on? I've had no GPs come to me. Has anyone come to you?
No, sorry, I'm not going to put my camera on. I'm in the middle of decorating my living room and I'm covered in paint. But no, we haven't heard anything. It's just been quite positive feedback from those people who've used our information to help them get better treatment. Because I think certainly those individuals you've mentioned were struggling to be heard. They were very much just, well, keep trying your diet, keep you the tablets. But this has helped them. But no, we haven't had any direct contact from GPs.
And so that, and then on the quantitative question, I suppose, yeah, we know that truncated GADA is a more specific test, and I think that's what that graph is showing, really. And I guess the question, the unknown, is what do those, if you want, slightly lower levels of truncated GADA mean? And you know, if we go to the, you know, the threefold increase threshold, you know, will we actually stop following up people who will develop type 1 in the future? So that's why I feel I want to talk to the participants about it and get their feedback, so that we're doing what they want, because, and what we haven't done and we will have in our analysis with you is the comparison of the full length GADA versus the truncated GADA, which we need to tease apart as well. And I think that will help us to work out what's going on.
Thank you.
David, I think you were next.
Yeah, I'm also not putting on my camera because I'm on a beach in Dubai. So I was going to ask you about, well, first of all, to tell you that Jerry Palmer did insulin autoantibodies in adults, and he found about 13% of them had positivity with his assay. So it's not all that different from your percentage. The second is really, you know, what to do about these truncated GAD guys. I mean, I think what I would suggest you do is do a QQ, quantile analysis, on all your GAD titers for using the truncated GAD, and then, I mean, it looks to me like you've got a few shoulders there, yeah, in your levels of GAD. Mm. So some of them will be very high titer, some of them look like quite high titer, and then you've got a low titer group, and then you may have another group, which in fact we had originally, which was in the normal range, and we actually excluded them in our secondary analysis of GADA. So I just would suggest that you do that. I think one of the questions you asked is whether you should follow these guys up and so on. I think you really should. Yeah, it's really valuable information.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm sort of sitting at the moment. And I guess I just want to make sure that we're not doing it inappropriately, but, you know, so that, you know, 20 years time, these people, but again, that's part of what a natural history study is. And I guess because there's a lot of screening going on at the moment, I'm really, and actually the participants have been fantastic. They have no problem with the idea that this is a natural history study and we're trying to find out more information. So from that perspective, they've been fantastic.
Des.
Just a lovely study, lovely presentation, Kathleen, very clear. Thank you very much. It's really a follow-on from Nick's question. In these sort of population level studies dealing with the queries, you say you've not had any contact, no GPs have contacted you. In primary care, often there's one or maybe two of the GPs who specialize in diabetes, and I'm perhaps surprised that some of them haven't been in touch with you. And what about hospital consultants? Have they been in touch with queries about what to do, or have you got a relationship, for example, with Parth, who's tried to cover some of these difficulties?
Yeah, and obviously Parth at the moment is you know, looking at this in terms of I don't know if Parth's on the call or not, but bringing these people into primary care, and we've been having similar conversations with Daniela, and obviously we're not at the point of doing that yet, but and you know, and I guess Rachel Besser in Oxford looking at doing that in children. But at the moment, no one's coming to us with any queries at all. We would obviously try to do the best we can to answer queries as they come, but at the moment they're just not coming. And perhaps that's because people know that Parth and Rachel, are actually trying to deal with that area. Daniela, have you had anything, have you had queries from individuals? Because obviously we've had a chat about following up people in adults.
No, I haven't. So we occasionally get these people from different sources, not very many, but nobody directly related to this study. And I would quite like to steer them to clinic. Nick and I were talking about kind of starting some form of early stage clinics and have this sort of relatively standardized approach what to do with them, because nobody quite knows. I think Parth is already doing this in Birmingham.
Yeah, sorry, Des.
No, Kathleen, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I suppose I was a bit taken aback by the HbA1. Obviously, it's very early days for our HbA1c results, but the fact that we've got 2 people with pre-diabetes or abnormal levels and 2 people who went straight to diagnosis, and actually then obviously we'll stop following them up. But it almost seems like a remarkably high frequency. And
I think for these people, they're not. You need a very clear link to NHS, and I'm not sure that primary care is the right place for that.
And the problems you've already alluded to, Daniela, the problems in adults. Well, at the very least, it'll need a different approach, or it does need a different approach from the problems with children. I think adults perhaps warrant well, I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure it should be studied. I won't say more than that.
If I may interject, I mean, I'm absolutely sure, because I've been looking after these guys for years. This is a big problem, and I think, unfortunately, neither the NHS consultants nor the paediatricians have any idea how to look after these cases. In fact, I would go on to say that neither do I, really. So I think it is a real problem.
So it's all the more reason for research, David, as you know.
Thank you, Des. Agreed.
I think we all agree. I think we all agree on that. There's definitely not more room for research, and I think it's fantastic, Kathleen. And I think adding to Des's comment is this: 5 to 10% of the population will develop type 2 diabetes. Some of these single antibodies will develop dysglycemia, and we know that HbA1c goes up with age, and we just don't know how to differentiate those. So I think all that work you're talking about with looking at Annette Ziegler's cutoffs, thinking about DRS is going to be vital. And maybe we could just have a chat with Daniela or an email conversation offline about clinical, because I think we are keen alongside Parth to set up starting to see these patients, and perhaps even offering that, because general practice is struggling generally. And I think they are a really complex group. And as David said, we don't really know, but at least if we have a few of them in one place and we're chatting, we can have a best stab.
Okay, and that's perfect for us as well, because I guess the thing that we're always aware of is that we're a non-clinical team, and actually, having that clinical support and being able to advise participants of where they can go for clinical advice would be fantastic.
I'll follow that up with an email after, if that's okay. Include Daniela.
Julian, did you have a last comment or question, and then we'll probably be out of time?
Yeah, okay. So just to be realistic, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for adults, I'm a paediatrician, but the ability for the NHS to absorb this in addition to everything else they do, where you can offer patients, even young patients with type 1 diabetes, maybe 1 or 2 consultations a year, I think you need a completely different approach. You need a group of nursing staff and maybe a psychologist or something, and maybe a doctor advisor to actually deal specifically with this group. I think the idea that the NHS can can just assimilate all these patients with single antibody or two antibodies into their current practice, which we know is hugely strained already, is really simply not possible. And I can't, and it needs a completely separate approach. The idea that you can give some time to these patients to sit and have a chat when you haven't actually got the time to look after all the young type 1 diabetes patients strikes me as being probably not the right solution. I know that's challenging, but it's true, because I mean, I've got one of these patients, a young child. We do a glycated hemoglobin on them twice a year. They go to Oxford and they talk to a doctor in Oxford called Rachel, and then they come back to me again. I think it needs to be a bit more than just, oh, I think we should see them. I think there needs to be a plan to see them, but not within the NHS. Sorry.
Thanks. No, thanks, Julian. Before Nick and Daniela come back to that, just for those who do need to leave, just thank you for joining us, and we'll be back in January. We'll send out an email about that later. But yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Nick, did you have a comment?
I think Daniela was first, but if Daniela is okay for me just to go. I totally agree, Julian. I think there needs to be a clear way of doing this, and I think we need to work out what that is. I think having them all scattered in numerous different places with no kind of clear oversight, with different people doing lots of different things, which is currently what's happening, some in general practice, some with lots of different clinicians. What I'm talking about is having them at least in one place, so someone's got, because I think you're right. I think they do just need HbA1c monitoring, probably, as per the kind of suggestion from the international guidance, and with someone just with some oversight and a person for these patients to contact when they're, if they do develop symptoms or if their HbA1c does come up, so that they're not at the moment scattered between different places. So I think it's more unifying. You're right, we don't have the time. We can't see these. Why would you need to see them every year to say, yeah, you still don't have diabetes? Great, we'll see you next year. So I think it's more, and I agree, it will be nurse-led predominantly. But I think you then do, when people start developing dysglycemia, have to have somewhere that they can come with someone who's, and at the moment, I don't think these people exist, but at least a bit of knowledge about what type 1 looks like, and hopefully in the future we're going to have therapies that we can start offering people as well. So I think we can't wait until that moment. We need to start thinking what that service would look like. But I agree, it's going to be challenging, and you can't have all of these people in seeing you face to face. We've got to be pragmatic for the NHS. I couldn't agree more.
Daniela.
Yeah,
thanks, Nick.
Just to following Julian and Nick, when I see these people, they are extremely stressed. They often got very mixed messages from whoever they saw, not in the study, but in the and they need to be seen. And one more thing, they very often have Libre already, and they're watching it like a hawk, which increases the stress. So the idea that it will be managed by primary care is, unless we have a very structured, kind of guidance, and is difficult. So let's meet up and make a solution to this.
Yeah, I think it definitely sounds like whether T1DRA is the right place for that. But yes, definitely, it is a space where we do need solutions, like you've just said, Daniela. And obviously, us in Bristol, from the research perspective, are not going to be the ones leading that because we're not clinical. Tom, did you?
Just a quick one, but the first thing is, given this is an adult group, at 40 people qualify for an annual HbA1c anyway as part of their annual health test, so that should be happening in primary care. Obviously, as has been mentioned, primary care is stretched to breaking point, so that may not be happening every year as it stands. but under kind of standard recommendations, that should be a thing that happens. And the other thing is, this sounds to me quite like one where peer support is the way to go, perhaps with someone who did get a screen early and went through it. But again, it just feels like the main need here is the monitoring, which should be happening anyway in primary care, and psychological support more than anything. And a model to do that, I think kind of the idea of involving a clinical psychologist, as mentioned, would be a good one. But I think that perhaps overly clinicalized, overly intervening clinically early may be not the model to go for here. Just a couple of thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Daniela, maybe we'll make yours the last comment. And then...
Yeah, it's just Tom, as following it up in primary care as a routine. These things usually don't go to GPs; they go to a practice nurse. And I don't want to sound patronizing, or they do excellent job, but they will see somebody who has age 45 and BMI of, I don't know, 27 or 28, and say, actually, you need to lose weight. And this is how disasters happen, because they are not actually appropriately understood as autoimmune diabetes.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, Kathleen.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the discussion. I find that really, really useful. And actually thinking about, because there have been broader conversations about insurance, it does show me that actually some of this has to happen in the clinical space, but actually there's room for more to be done in research as well. And actually, maybe I hadn't fully taken that on board before. So I think that's been really, really useful. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll probably see quite a few of you in Exeter next month, but then we'll be back online in January when we have a date.
Bye.
Right.
Bye. Bye.